There is a question that the Imperium of Man stopped asking a long time ago, because the answer became inconvenient. The question is this: what are the Space Marines for? The obvious answer is war. They are warriors of inhuman capability, post-human beings forged from the gene seed of the Emperor's 20 Primarch sons. Soldiers who do not tire and do not break, and do not fear in the ways that ordinary men fear. They are instruments of violence, and the Imperium is very good at producing instruments of violence. There are tens of thousands of them active at any given moment, spread across the galaxy in chapters of 1,000 warriors each, prosecuting campaigns that stretch for decades across worlds that ordinary soldiers could not reach. So yes, war, that is the obvious answer. But there is a deeper question beneath it. Not what Space Marines are built to do, but what they exist to protect. Whether the thing being defended is only the Imperium as a political structure, as a hierarchy of power and faith and enforced compliance, or whether it is something smaller than that, and harder to see from the high towers of command, and infinitely more important, whether it is the people. The ordinary, unremarkable, suffering people of the Imperium of Man, who have never met a Space Marine and never will, who live their short lives in the dark between the stars, doing the work that the great machine requires of them, paying their taxes and their tithes and their blood, praying to a God who does not answer, dying in wars they did not choose and crises they cannot escape, every one of them a single human life with weight and meaning and the specific irreplaceable quality of being a person. Most Space Marine chapters do not think about those people. This is not cruelty. It is priority. The chapter must be maintained. The war must be won. The campaign must advance. In the grand calculus of Imperium scale strategy, one village on one world in one sector of one segmentum is a number so small it rounds to 0. 1,000 people against a tactical objective, 10,000 against a strategic one. You do what you must to win the war. Because if you lose the war, everyone dies anyway. This is how the Imperium thinks. This is how most of the Adeptus Astartes thinks. And then there are the Salamanders. The Salamanders are the 18th Legion of Space Marines, founded from the gene seed of the Primarch Vulcan, who was raised on a world of volcanic fire and dying light by ordinary people who were kind to a strange and powerful child who had fallen from the sky. They are one of the oldest chapters in existence. Their homeworld is called Nocturne, a world that should not be survivable, and they have fought on every front the Imperium has opened since the Great Crusade began. They are not known for the size of their fleet, because their fleet is modest. They are not known for their numbers, because they keep deliberately fewer warriors than the Codex Astartes permits, a choice that has frustrated Imperial strategists for 10,000 years. They are not known for the elegance of their tactics, though they are competent, or the innovation of their doctrine, though they adapt. They are known for two things. The first is that they do not leave their people behind. The second is that when a salamander stands between a civilian and the thing that wants to kill that civilian, he does not calculate the cost. He just holds. The salamanders are the chapter that goes back for the wounded, that spends its own blood to move refugees out of a war zone that other chapters would seal and bomb from orbit, that views the protection of ordinary human life not as a tactical consideration but as the reason the battle is being fought at all. In a galaxy of warriors who have been told that humanity's survival depends on their willingness to sacrifice individual humans, the salamanders are the ones who look down at the individual human and see someone worth saving. Other chapters find this uncomfortable. Some find it outright suspicious. A space marine who hesitates to spend civilian lives is, by the logic of most Astartes doctrine, a space marine who might hesitate to spend anything, who might not have the necessary coldness, the iron interior that lets a commander do what must be done. The Salamanders have heard this argument. They disagree with it. They have disagreed with it, quietly and consistently, for 10,000 years. This is their story. A story about fire, about survival, about a world that the galaxy keeps trying to destroy and a people who keep refusing to be destroyed. About a Primarch who was the most human of the Emperor's sons and what that humanity cost him. About warriors who chose to remain capable of grief and what that choice made them. The galaxy calls the Salamanders kind. The Salamanders are not kind in the way of those who have never seen cruelty. They are kind in the way of those who have, and chose otherwise. There is a difference. To understand the Salamanders, you have to understand Nocturne, not as a strategic asset or a galactic coordinate, but as a place, what it looks like, what it asks of the people who live there, why it produces the kind of men it produces. Nocturne is a world that is dying, not quickly, not dramatically, in the way of worlds consumed by war or swallowed by the warp. Slowly, methodically over the course of geological time, in the grinding inevitable way of physics, the star that Nocturne orbits has been cooling and contracting for millions of years, shedding its warmth the way a fire sheds its last light before the coals go dark. The people of Nocturne have been living under that dimming light for as long as their records extend. They know it. They do not pretend otherwise. The death of their son is a fact they have integrated into their theology and their sense of themselves, the backdrop against which every life is lived. The world itself compensates, in the brutal way that nature compensates when one heat source fails by producing another. Nocturne is volcanic on a scale that would be considered catastrophic on most worlds. The tectonic activity is constant and violent, the ground shifting and breaking and reforming, mountains rising and collapsing, the crust cracked open in 100,000 places where magma seeps or surges to the surface, rivers of fire wind across the landscape, lakes of molten rock sit in volcanic calderas that dwarf anything most worlds can produce. The air carries ash and sulfur and the specific smell of a world being continuously remade from the inside. There is a moon. It is called Prometheus. This matters because Prometheus is where the Salamanders live when they are not on campaign, their fortress monastery carved into the stone of the moon itself, looking down on the burning world their Primarch chose as his home. And it matters because of what Prometheus does to Nocturne. The moon orbits close enough that its gravitational influence triggers what the Nocturnian people call the time of trial, the night of nights, the regular catastrophic seismic event that remakes the surface of their world. Mountains move, coastlines change. Settlements that have stood for generations are consumed in earthquakes and lava flows and ash storms that turn daylight into darkness. The night of nights comes without mercy and without warning sufficient to prevent the loss of life. It comes, and it takes what it takes, and the people rebuild. This is the first lesson Nocturne teaches. Everything will be taken. You will lose it. And then you will begin again. The people who live on Nocturne are called Nocturnians, and they are among the hardiest humans in the Imperium, though hardiest is not quite the right word, because it implies a toughness of the kind that walls itself off, that develops a skin thick enough that nothing gets through. The Nocturnians are not like that. They are tough in the way of people who have had to help each other survive too many times to have any illusions about self-sufficiency. Community is not a value on Nocturne. It is a survival strategy. You do not let your neighbor die in the flood, because you do not want to be the person left alone when the flood comes again. Their skin is dark, a consequence of generations of human adaptation to the radiation that Nocturne's dying sun and hyperactive geology pour into the atmosphere. The people of Nocturne have carried this darkness in their blood for millennia. In the Astartes who become salamanders, it deepens further still. The melanchromic organ, the implant that controls and intensifies skin pigmentation in all space marines, reacts to Nocturne's specific radiological character with an intensity no other world produces, driving the skin from the dark brown of the Nocturnian human to an obsidian black. Salamanders are the darkest of all the Space Marine chapters, their skin the color of volcanic rock, their eyes burning orange or red from the same process, lit from within like embers. They look like something born from fire. That is not entirely wrong. The world has 7 sanctuary cities, each one a fortress in the volcanic landscape, each one maintained against the Night of Nights with the specific engineering knowledge of a people who have been building in the path of destruction for millennia. Hesiod, Themis, Epimethus, Heliosa, Aethonian, Clymene, Scarrock. Each one has its own traditions, its own character, the specific pride of a settlement that has survived long enough to know who it is. The people who live in them are farmers and miners and craftspeople and soldiers and everything that a city requires. All of them aware that the ground under their feet is not reliable and that the sky can turn to ash with very little notice. What they have in place of the security that most imperial worlds take for granted is each other and the salamanders. The relationship between the 18th chapter and the people of Nocturne is unlike anything found elsewhere in the Adeptus Astartes. Other chapters take their world as a resource, a source of recruits, a staging ground, a political possession. They are aloof from the populace. They do not, as a rule, know the people by name or return to them after service. The chapter is its own world, self-contained, sealed by the mystery of transformation from the ordinary humanity that produced it. The salamanders go home. A salamander who has completed a campaign returns to Nocturne and walks among the people. He speaks with them. He helps in the rebuilding after the seismic events that the moon's gravity triggers. He is a presence in the 7 cities, known and recognizable, and the relationship is not that of a god visiting supplicants but something closer to a son returning to his family. The Primarch Vulcan set this standard himself, living among the Nocturnians before the Emperor found him, choosing to protect them over and above any other consideration. His sons inherited the practice. This makes the people of Nocturne different from most imperial populations in a crucial way. They know their space marines, not as legends or mythic protectors glimpsed in battle, but as individuals. Warriors who were born in their cities, chosen from their children, who went away and became something extraordinary and still came back. The salamanders know the weight of that. They know that every person they fight for is a face, not a number. It is not a comfortable thing to carry that knowledge into battle, It is harder to spend lives when you know them. It is harder to accept that this village must be sacrificed for the greater tactical objective when the village has a name and you know the people who live in it. The salamanders carry this difficulty as deliberately as they carry their weapons. They refuse to put it down. There is something that happens to recruits during what the chapter calls the Trial of Fire. Young Nocturnians who believe themselves worthy to join the chapter are brought to the volcanic wilderness and tested not simply for their physical capacity or their willingness to kill, but for something harder to measure. For the thing Vulcan believed mattered most in a warrior, the willingness to save. The trials vary. The details are not widely known outside the chapter, but the principle is consistent. The young man who shows only his own strength is not what the chapter needs. The young man who shows his willingness to place himself between the fire and the person who cannot run, that is the seed of a salamander. They are built from this ground, this dying, violent, ash-choked, unreliable, beloved ground. And they carry it with them everywhere they go. There is a story the salamanders tell about the night their Primarch arrived. The stories of the Primarch's landings are all remarkable in one way or another. Children of inhuman power falling from the sky onto worlds that had no framework for them, growing into warriors and leaders and eventually monsters or heroes depending on which world they landed on and what that world asked of them. The landing is always the beginning. The world does the shaping. Vulcan fell on Nocturne. Not into a palace, not into the hands of a warlord, not onto a battlefield or into the care of someone who would recognize immediately what they had found. He fell near a village, and a blacksmith found him. And the blacksmith did what the Nocturnians do, which was to take the strange and powerful child in and raise him as if he belonged there. His name was Nibble. He was a craftsman, a maker of tools and weapons, a man of the specific quiet dignity that comes from knowing your work is necessary and doing it well. He had a forge and a family and a life built close to the volcanic landscape that provided both the raw materials of his trade and the constant reminder that nothing was permanent. He took the child that had fallen from the sky and he gave him a home and a craft and a name. Vulcan grew as the Primarchs grew, impossibly fast, impossibly large, abilities emerging that no normal child possessed, strength and endurance that made the people of the village uncertain how to feel about the boy in the blacksmith's forge. But what the Primarch also grew into, alongside the physical impossibility of what he was the specific sensibility that a childhood in Nebel's forge produced. Vulcan learned to make things. He learned the patience that smithing requires, the understanding that good work takes time and cannot be rushed, that the metal must be worked while it is hot, and that every hammer blow matters. He learned the satisfaction of holding something he had made with his own hands and knowing it was good. He also learned what the tools were for. Nibel did not make weapons as ends in themselves. He made them to protect. The distinction sounds simple, and perhaps it is, but it runs deep in the Promethean philosophy that would eventually codify what Vulcan instinctively understood. A weapon is a means. The protection of the person who needs defending is the purpose. You do not build a sword and then look for things to cut with it. You build a sword because someone requires protection, and without the sword they cannot have it. Vulcan was a young man, still by the standards of Nocturne, when he had already become what he would always be, the strongest person in any room he entered, a craftsman of extraordinary ability, and someone whose first instinct upon encountering danger was to stand between the danger and the people who could not stand there themselves. The people of his village loved him for it. He was not remote or godlike in his bearing. He was present. He was theirs. The Emperor was watching. The Emperor was always watching in those years as his sons came of age on the worlds that had shaped them, assessing each one, learning what the galaxy had made of his greatest creations. When he came to Nocturne, he did not arrive with fanfare or the full weight of his presence. He arrived as a stranger. 2 strangers came to Nocturne in the old accounts, though only one was what he claimed. The contest that followed is the hinge point of the Salamander's mythology, the story they return to when they need to understand who they are. The strangers challenged Vulcan to a contest. The rules were simple: a day's hunt, the prize going to whoever brought back the most magnificent kill. Vulcan accepted. He was a hunter as well as a smith, as Nocturnians must be, and he was confident in his ability. He hunted. He was good at it. He found his quarry and made his kill. And then he heard screaming from the direction of his village. He came back. Not with his prize, with his speed, abandoning the trophy that would have won the contest, because the screaming was the sound of people in danger and he was the person who could do something about it. A drake had come down from the mountains, or a volcanic event had threatened the village, or some other catastrophe had struck while he was away. The details differ between tellings, the core does not. Vulcan came back and saved his people. He lost the contest. The other stranger had fulfilled the terms and returned with a greater trophy. By the rules of the day as established, Vulcan had failed. The Emperor revealed himself. He had been the other stranger. He had, apparently, brought down a greater kill than Vulcan while Vulcan was running back to his village to prevent deaths. And what the Emperor told him, looking at this enormous and grief-stricken young man who had just failed a test by the act of caring for his people more than his own victory, was that he had not failed at all. That the contest had been the wrong thing to win, that Vulcan had understood something without being told that some of the Emperor's other sons would never fully grasp, that the point of power is the protection of those who do not have it. This story is mythology, and mythology simplifies. The actual reunion of Vulcan with his father was undoubtedly more complex, the conversation richer, the emotions more tangled. But the story the Salamanders keep is this one, because the story the Salamanders keep is about what matters, about the moment when the most powerful being on Nocturne chose to lose a contest rather than let ordinary people die while he was busy winning. That is Vulcan. That is who he was before he became a Primarch, and who he remained when he was one. The galaxy tried many times to break that quality out of him. It never fully succeeded. He went with the Emperor. He took up the command of the 18th Legion, who had been fighting the Crusade without their Primarch for years already, carrying the gene seed of a man they had never met. When Vulcan arrived, and they finally knew him, something settled into place in the Legion that had always been slightly unresolved. They recognized the quality he carried, the specific, unusual, difficult compassion. They had been shaped toward it already, somehow, by the inheritance of his blood. Seeing it made manifest in the man himself was like seeing the word that had always been on the tip of the tongue. They were his. He was theirs. He was Nocturne's. He walked among his warriors as he had walked among the people of his village. He knew their names. He cared about their craft, The legion's masters of the forge were elevated under his watch. The tradition of every salamander making his own weapons not an optional flourish, but a fundamental practice. Because a warrior who has made his own blade understands something about the value of the life he defends with it. He demanded that his sons be excellent. He demanded that they be compassionate. He refused to accept that these demands contradicted each other. The galaxy would spend the next 10,000 years testing that refusal. The salamanders follow a philosophy they call the Promethean Creed. It is not a religion in the way that the imperial cult is a religion, though it draws on similar instincts. The importance of fire as a purifying and necessary force. The idea that suffering can be made meaningful if endured for the right reasons. The weight of duty is something sacred rather than merely practical. It is more accurately described as a set of convictions so deeply integrated into the chapter's identity that they have become indistinguishable from the chapter itself. The core of it is not complicated. A salamander endures what must be endured. He does not yield to pain or despair or the specific despair of the long war, the 10,000-year grinding campaign against everything that wants to end the human race. He does not accept defeat as a permanent condition. He recovers, he rebuilds, he returns to the forge, and he makes something new from the wreckage of what was destroyed. Fire consumes, and fire purifies, and fire gives warmth, and all three are true simultaneously. But it is the part about people that distinguishes the creed from every other warrior philosophy the Adeptus Astartes has produced. A salamander does not regard the ordinary human as a resource. This sounds simple, and in its statement it is, but the implications radiate outward into almost every tactical decision the chapter makes. Other chapters have argued, with justification, that the Imperium cannot survive if every individual life is treated as precious, that the scale of the enemies the Imperium faces demands a mathematics of sacrifice, a willingness to spend the few to save the many, to abandon the village in order to hold the city, to hold the city in order to save the sector, to let the sector burn in order to preserve the segmentum. The calculations are real. They are not wrong exactly. The salamanders make a different reckoning, or rather they resist the reckoning itself. A salamander would say that the moment you start treating ordinary people as numbers, you have already lost something essential. Something that the Imperium's enemies cannot take from you in battle, but that you have given away freely at a command table. That the reason the Imperium is worth defending is precisely the lives of the people who live in it. That a galaxy with no ordinary people in it, only soldiers and strategists, would have already been conquered in every way that matters. This makes them hard to work with in a joint campaign. It makes other chapter masters grit their teeth. It occasionally costs the salamanders more of their own blood than a different doctrine would allow, because they choose to spend marines to protect civilians that other commanders would simply leave. They accept this cost. They have always accepted it. The creed also shapes how they approach their craft. Every salamander is expected to create. Not to be handed his weapons by the chapter's armorers, but to forge them, to work the metal himself, to understand the process that makes a weapon, to hold in his hands the object that his hands made, and to know that when he raises it in battle, he is raising something of himself. This is more than symbolism. Though the symbolism runs deep, it is a practice of humility and attention. The warrior who has stood at the forge for hours shaping a blade is not a warrior who takes his weapons casually. He is not a warrior who takes what he kills with those weapons casually. The forge is a meditation. The Promethean Creed treats the act of making as inseparable from the act of defending. You build, you protect what you build. You build again when it is destroyed. The Salamander's master of forge, the Forgfather, is one of the most respected positions in the chapter, the keeper of both the practical art of smithing and the philosophical tradition that surrounds it. The Forgfather does not only maintain the chapter's weapons and vehicles, he maintains the chapter's relationship with the truth of what those weapons are for. There are other Space Marine chapters who have elaborate philosophical frameworks. The Iron Hands have their clan companies and their belief in flesh as weakness. The White Scars have their tradition of the steppes and the brotherhood of the hunt. The Space Wolves have their Fenrisian mythology of pack and word and the long night. These are real and rich traditions, and they shape real and distinct warriors. What is unusual about the Promethean Creed is that its center is not the chapter. It is the people outside the chapter. Every other warrior tradition the Adeptus Astartes maintains is fundamentally inward-looking. The chapter is the community. The chapter is the family. The chapter is the thing worth protecting. The ordinary human is important in the abstract as the thing the chapter fights for. But the emotional weight of the tradition falls on brother warriors. For the Salamanders, the emotional weight falls also on the people of Nocturne, on the smiths and miners and farmers and parents who raised the boys who became Space Marines, on the families that a Salamander still knows the names of, because he went back. Because the chapter allows its warriors to maintain something that almost no other chapter permits, a connection to the world they came from. This is the strangest thing about them, the thing that most troubles the Inquisition when it thinks too carefully about the subject. A Space Marine is not supposed to be a person in the way that a human is a person. He is supposed to have been transformed beyond that, the emotional bonds of ordinary humanity burned away in the process of becoming something greater. This is, in the standard Codex doctrine, a feature rather than a flaw. A Space Marine cannot be manipulated through the loves of ordinary life if he has none. The Salamanders are partially an exception. They are Space Marines. They are fully transformed, fully post-human in their capabilities, fully devoted to the Emperor's work. But they carry, alongside all of that, the specific grief of knowing what they are fighting for. They have not been protected from the sadness of loss or the meaning of the thing they defend. The Inquisition's concern is, in one sense, valid. Attachment is a vulnerability. A warrior who cares about the people behind him is a warrior who can be hurt in a way that a warrior who cares about nothing cannot. The Salamander's answer to this concern is not reassuring in any strategic sense. Their answer is that a warrior who cares about nothing has already been conquered. That the point of being impervious to loss is not worth celebrating if you have become impervious by first destroying everything worth losing. You could call it sentimentality. The galaxy has at various points called it worse. The Salamanders call it the reason they wake up and fight. The Great Crusade was the most ambitious project in human history, and remains so. 2 centuries of relentless expansion. The Emperor's armies driving outward from Terra in every direction, bringing world after world back into the human fold, breaking the alien empires and human warlords who had turned the age of strife's chaos into fiefdoms, writing the Imperium one campaign at a time across the body of the galaxy. The 18th Legion fought through all of it. Before Vulcan arrived to take command, the Legion already carried something of what it would become. The gene seed they bore was his, though they had not yet met him, and the qualities that gene seed encoded expressed themselves in the Legion's culture before it had the language to name them. The warriors of the 18th were characterized, even in those early years, by a certain directness of purpose. Not the cold ruthlessness of the Night Lords or the furious aggression of the World Eaters, but something more considered, more attentive to consequences. They used fire extensively, in the literal operational sense of flame weapons and concentrated melter strikes and the scorched earth tactics that broke enemy formations before the melee was joined. Fire was their medium, and they wielded it with an artisan's care, not a pyromaniac's abandon. When Vulcan came, the Legion understood itself. The campaigns of the Great Crusade brought the salamanders to the full range of what the galaxy contained, and in each of them the character of their Primarch shaped how they fought. The 18th was not the largest Legion. It was not the fastest or the most aggressive or the most strategically innovative. It was the most thorough. A world that the salamanders had pacified stayed pacified, not only because the military resistance had been crushed, but because the civilian infrastructure had been considered. Because the people who would be left behind after the Legion moved on had been accounted for. Because the rebuilding, the re-establishment of supply lines and shelter and the basic requirements of human life had been treated as part of the campaign rather than someone else's problem after the fighting ended. This was Vulcan's standard. It was unusual enough to be noticed by other Legion commanders, and their reactions ranged from admiring to baffled to irritated, depending on the commander. Horus Lupercal, the War Master, worked well with Vulcan because Horus understood, among his many other abilities, how to value what each Primarch brought. Vulcan brought thoroughness, reliability, and the particular virtue of leaving things better than he found them, which was not universally true of the Legions, and which Horus recognized as genuinely useful even if it was not the quality most celebrated in war. There were Crusade campaigns where the Salamander's approach caused friction. Operations where speed was prioritized over care, where the command structure wanted the world broken open and the army moved on and the civilian situation handled by administrative teams who would follow in the wake of the advance. Vulcan pushed back against this when the situation allowed. He did not always win the argument, but he made the argument, consistently and without apology, that a world liberated at the cost of everyone who lived on it was not a world that had been liberated, but one that had simply changed ownership of its ruins. The 18th also carried into the Crusade the tradition of the Forge. Their weapons were works of craft in a way that standard Legion equipment was not. Master crafted bolters, thunder hammers that had taken months to complete, artificer armor whose every plate had been fitted and refined with the specific attention that a Nocturnian trained in the volcanic workshops understood as the minimum required. Other legions equipped their warriors from standardized production. The Salamanders equipped theirs with something closer to individual creation. This had practical consequences. Their weapons lasted longer. They performed better in the extreme conditions of varied theaters because they had been made to tolerances that mass production could not reliably achieve. A Salamander's equipment was also his, in a sense that standard issue equipment never was, and that ownership produced a relationship, The warrior who had made his bolter and knew every flaw and refinement in its mechanism used it with a precision that came from intimate knowledge. It also had philosophical consequences. You cannot spend months creating something with your own hands and then be casual about how you use it. You cannot hold a hammer you made yourself in the forge of your chapter's traditions and swing it at something human without feeling the weight of that act differently than a warrior who picked the hammer up from a rack of identical hammers that morning. The salamanders were not slow to violence. Let that be clear. They were warriors, and they fought like warriors, with the fury and commitment of men who had been told from the beginning of their training that the enemies of humanity were real and numerous, and that failing to destroy them was not a philosophical position but a death sentence for everyone else. They burned their enemies. They charged their lines. They broke alien formations and crushed heretical uprisings and did everything that the Great Crusade required with the competence and the controlled aggression of one of the finest fighting forces the galaxy had seen. But they carried, alongside the aggression, a constant awareness of what was behind them, who they were protecting, why the burning mattered. A salamander at war was not an instrument pretending it had no maker. He was a man who had chosen to become what he was, for reasons he could still name on his worst days, carrying tools he had made with his own hands toward enemies he could describe, on behalf of people he knew the faces of. That is a heavier thing to carry than a bolter. It does not make the bolter less effective. It makes the hand that holds it more deliberate. There is something about Vulcan that the histories take longer to reveal than most of his story, and that changes the nature of everything else once you know it. Vulcan cannot die. This is not a metaphor about legacy or the endurance of his ideals through his sons, though both of those things are also true. It is a literal statement about the biology of the Primarch. Vulcan is what the Imperium scholars call a perpetual, a being of extreme biological and metaphysical resilience that allows him to recover from injuries that should be fatal and to return from deaths that are definitively real. He has died. He has returned. He has died again. The number of times is not entirely settled in the records, because the records were not always kept by people who knew what they were witnessing. What this means for his character is more important than what it means for his enemies. Consider what it is to be Vulcan, to be a being of immense compassion and empathy in a position where you are the target of immense violence. To care deeply about the lives of those around you and to know, in the specific and intimate way of experience, what it means to lose them. To watch your warriors die at Istvan Fee, and to know that you will survive it, that you will carry the weight of their deaths, that the universe has arranged things so that the most empathetic being in the Emperor's army is also the one who will outlast nearly everyone he loves. And then to be captured, tortured, killed repeatedly by a brother who understands exactly what he is and has decided that the way to break him is to make him watch himself die over and over until he stops believing the deaths mean anything, until the specific horror of repeated death becomes normal, until compassion itself becomes the thing he needs to destroy simply to be able to continue. The brother is Conrad Curzay, the Night Haunter, the Primarch of the Night Lord's Legion, one of the traitors who would align with Horus. And Curzay's captivity of Vulcan is one of the most disturbing episodes in the entire history of the heresy, not because of the physical violence, extraordinary as it was, but because of what Curzay was trying to prove. Curzay believed that Vulcan's compassion was a pretense, that the kindness was a performance that would collapse under sufficient pressure, revealing the same darkness underneath that Kurzi believed animated everyone. His campaign against Vulcan was not a military operation. It was a philosophical argument made in blood. He killed Vulcan in new and increasingly methodical ways, and he watched. And he waited for the moment when Vulcan stopped caring, when the deaths became nothing, when the man who had saved a village rather than win a contest would finally, inevitably, become someone who would let the village burn. It never happened. This is not a story with a neat resolution. The captivity was long and real, and the suffering was real, and Vulcan's recoveries were not instantaneous or painless. He came back from each death changed, carrying the memory of it, the specific accumulated weight of too many experiences of dying. He came back, and he kept being who he was, and Kurzi kept looking for the crack that never appeared. And the absence of the crack was itself a kind of answer to the question being asked, though not one that Kurzi could accept. But the toll of it is visible in what Vulcan became afterward. The Primarch who returned from Kurzi's captivity was not broken in the way Kurzi intended. He was, however, changed. Something in him was more concentrated, the humanity more intense, the grief more present, the understanding of what the galaxy could do to things worth protecting more visceral and more complete. He had survived the attempt to murder his compassion by killing him repeatedly, and the survival had not left him untouched. He was still Vulcan. He still cared. And the caring was harder now, the way anything is harder when you carry more weight. You do not stop because the weight increases. You adjust your stance. The fact of his perpetual nature was not widely known among the salamanders themselves. The Primarch was not an explainer of his own nature. He modeled what he believed rather than narrating it. And what the salamanders saw was a leader who endured, who recovered, who came back. The theological interpretation, that fire purifies, that what survives the fire is what is truly real, mapped cleanly onto what they observed in him. The specific metaphysics of his biology were less important than the fact of what he demonstrated. You can survive the worst the galaxy can do and still be who you are. That is the message. That is the message that the salamanders carry into every war. Not that they are invincible, they are not. Not that their compassion protects them, it does not. And sometimes it costs them more than a harder philosophy would. But that the thing the galaxy most consistently tries to destroy in its warriors, the ability to feel the weight of what they do, can be retained. That it does not have to be sacrificed in the making of a weapon. Vulcan survived Kurzi. He survived the heresy. He survived, eventually, what the galaxy did to him in the years that followed. He carried his people's faces through all of it. This is why they build statues to him on Nocturne. Not primarily because he was strong, though he was. Because he was Vulcan, the man who lost the contest and saved the village. The Primarch who endured Kurzi and came back carrying his grief rather than discarding it. The Perpetual who did not use his inability to die permanently as an excuse to stop caring about death. He cared. Every time he came back. And he cared about the ones he had lost. And he went back to the forge. And he made something new. That is the thing the salamanders worship, insofar as the Promethean creed can be called worship. Not the strength, the insistence. The worst day the salamanders ever had was not one day. It was the span of hours that began when the guns of 4 legions turned on 2 they were supposed to be fighting alongside, on a black plain on a world called Istvan V, in the 6th year of the 31st millennium. The Drop Site Massacre. The context requires a moment, because what happened at Istvan V can only be understood against the scale of what had been lost to produce the situation. The heresy had begun at Istvan III, where Horus had destroyed the loyal elements of his own legion by bombing them from orbit and then sending in the rest to finish the survivors. The treachery was known, or suspected by this point. The Emperor had ordered a force assembled to bring the War Master to account. 7 legions were sent. Their disposition was unfortunate. The first wave, the Iron Hands, the Raven Guard, the Salamanders, would make planetfall and engage Horus's forces in the ruined city below. The second wave, the Alpha Legion, the Night Lords, the Iron Warriors, the Word Bearers, would reinforce them once they had established position. The first wave landed. They fought. The Salamanders came down in the teeth of a world already consumed by the war that had begun here. Istvan V's surface scarred by the fighting that had preceded them. They engaged the enemy, and they were winning, which sounds like the beginning of a different story than the one this is. They were good enough to hold their ground against what they faced, the veteran legions of Horus's main force. They pushed forward. And then the second wave landed. The reinforcing legions who were supposed to join the assault. The second wave opened fire on them. The word betrayal does not quite reach what happened next, though betrayal is the word history uses. What happened was a systematic destruction. 4 full legions turning their firepower on an allied force that had not yet understood what was happening, that had been positioned by the logic of the battle with their backs to the landing zone, facing the enemy ahead, unaware that the enemy had been extended to include the ground behind them. The Iron Hands, the Raven Guard, the Salamanders, caught between the traitor legions they had come to fight and the traitor legions they had trusted to fight beside them, hammered from 2 directions, simultaneously by forces they had no preparation for, in terrain that offered no useful cover, against numbers that made organized resistance almost impossible. The Salamanders were closest to the landing zone. In one account, this means they were closest to the guns when they turned. In another, it means they were the fastest to understand what was happening. The accounts do not fully agree, because the accounts come from people who were there and survived, and survival in those conditions involves a specific narrowing of attention. This wall, this enemy, this 15 seconds. That makes it difficult to reconstruct the whole. What is certain is that the Salamanders took catastrophic losses. The specific numbers are contested. The legions of the heresy were vast, tens of thousands strong, and the Salamanders were not among the largest. The scale of the slaughter at Istvan V reduced the 18th Legion to a shattered remnant of what it had been. Warriors who had fought through the Great Crusade, who had made their weapons in the forges of Prometheus and carried them across 100 worlds, died on the black rock of Istvan V in the hours that followed the betrayal. Not in honorable battle against an enemy they could face. In slaughter, organized and methodical, by legions who had fought beside them and now chose differently. Vulcan was there. He fought. He was, as his warriors were, caught by the scale of what had been prepared for them, the ambush too large and too complete for even a Primarch's capabilities to fully counter. He survived because he would survive, But survival at Istvan V was not an escape. It was a transition from one kind of horror to another. Kurz was waiting. The Night Haunter had come to Istvan V for Vulcan specifically. The ambush was a trap within a trap, the military slaughter providing cover for a more personal operation. The capture of the Primarch of the Salamanders by the Primarch who had spent the most time thinking about what it would mean to break him. Vulcan was taken alive. His legion was left to find their own way to survival in the wreckage of the worst day in their history. Among the survivors was a warrior named Artellus Numian, captain of the Pyre Guard, the Fire Drakes, Vulcan's personal guard. The warriors who should have been closest to their Primarch, who were in the worst position of all because they had been separated from him at the moment of his capture. Numion survived. He carried the weight of that survival with him for years. A warrior whose singular purpose had been to protect the person who could not be permanently killed, who had failed at the moment that failure had the most consequence. What Numion did with that survival is a different story, one that unfolds across the long aftermath of Istvan V, and it leads to places he could not have anticipated on the day he walked away from the Black Plain with his legion in pieces around him. But the day of the massacre is where it begins. The survivors of the Salamanders were scattered. Leaderless in the operational sense, their Primarch taken. Their chain of command disrupted by the losses. They made their way off Istvan V through whatever means they could find, fighting through the chaos of the aftermath, finding ships, finding each other. They were not destroyed. This matters. The Iron Hands took losses that effectively shattered their command structure for a generation. The Raven Guard were reduced to near nothing. The Salamanders, though mauled, retained enough coherence to continue functioning as a legion. Reduced, traumatized, without Vulcan, but alive and capable of choice. They chose to fight on. No Primarch. No clear chain of command from the top. A legion that had taken catastrophic losses and had every reason to consolidate, to retreat to Nocturne and rebuild, to declare that the war above their ability to influence had passed them by. They did not do this. Individual companies and officers made their own way through the heresy, fighting where they could, lending their strength to whatever loyal forces they could reach, carrying the standard of the 18th in a war that had produced the worst day of their existence. This also is the Promethean creed. You endure what you must endure. You are reduced to your essential self, the fire having taken everything that was not absolutely real, and then you discover what the essential self actually is. You rebuild. You do not stop. The fire at Istvan V took almost everything. What survived was what was real. What was real was still salamanders. Konrad Kurz was one of the most intelligent beings the galaxy had produced, in the specific and dangerous way that intelligence becomes dangerous when it is married to nihilism. He had grown up on Nostramo, a world of darkness where suffering was the primary language and fear was the only reliable tool of governance. He had built himself into a warlord and a tyrant in the shadow of that world before the Emperor found him, and when the Emperor found him and showed him a grander theatre for his methods, Kurz had taken his darkness with him into the Crusade. He believed that darkness was the truth, that every apparent light, every act of kindness, every display of courage, every philosopher's argument that the universe contained goodness that was worth preserving was a performance over a void. His Primarch's sight, the prophetic gift that allowed him to see possible futures, showed him endings without exceptions. Death for everything. He had convinced himself that the visions were not a curse, but a clarity, that he alone was honest enough to look at the galaxy and refuse the comforting fiction that it mattered what kind of person you tried to be. And then there was Vulcan. Curzay hated Vulcan in the way you hate a counter-argument that you can't quite refute. The Primarch of the Salamanders was everything Curzay's worldview required to be a lie. And the lie kept not collapsing under scrutiny. A being of immense power who had chosen freely and consistently not to use that power to dominate, but to protect. A warrior who cared about the people behind him as something more than a theoretical justification. A philosopher who had built his philosophy not from the safety of abstraction, but from actual life on Nocturne, surrounded by actual people he actually knew. Curzay's project when he took Vulcan captive after Istvan Fee was the project of a man trying to disprove something he couldn't argue away. He couldn't defeat the Promethean creed in debate. So he tried to defeat it in practice. He killed Vulcan. He killed him in ways designed to be degrading rather than honorable, to strip away the dignity that the philosophy required, to make Vulcan confront the fact that his perpetual nature was not a mark of divine favor, but a biological accident that would keep producing the experience of dying without producing the release of it. He killed him and watched him revive and killed him again, looking for the moment when the compassion curdled into something else, when the man who had saved the village finally decided the village wasn't worth it. The records of Vulcan's captivity are fragmentary and, in their existing form, distressing. The Salamanders do not keep the detailed accounts, or if they do, they are not shared. What survives is the outline, and the outline is consistent. A sustained campaign of psychological and physical assault, designed specifically for the psychology of the person being assaulted. Personalized cruelty in the truest sense. Every action chosen for what it was intended to prove. Curzay was not torturing Vulcan purely for pleasure, though there was pleasure in it for a being of his nature. He was conducting a proof. He believed that under enough pressure, the light goes out. That the essential self, stripped of everything that isn't absolutely real, to use the Promethean language against itself, would be shown to be dark. That Vulcan would eventually look at the person he was and see what Curzay saw when he looked at everyone. Nothing worth preserving. What actually happened is harder to categorize as either victory or defeat, because it was both and neither. Vulcan did not break in the way Curzay intended. He did not renounce his care for his people. He did not embrace nihilism. He did not become Curzay. The fundamental orientation of who he was, toward protection, toward compassion, toward the meaning of ordinary lives, survived the captivity, recognizably intact. But it cost him. The records suggest a being profoundly changed by the experience, carrying something from it that was not there before, not darkness in Curzay's sense, but the specific gravity of too much knowledge about what the galaxy is capable of. He had known, intellectually, that suffering existed. He had been a soldier in the Great Crusade. He had seen worlds in ruin. He had lost warriors. After Curzay, he knew suffering in a more intimate register. He had felt it applied with precision to himself, over and over, by a being who understood exactly what he was. He escaped eventually. The details are contested and the circumstances murky. What matters is that he came back, marked by what had been done to him. carrying it the way the Promethean Creed says you carry what the fire does to you, not by denying it happened, but by refusing to let it be the only thing that defines what you are. He went back to the forge. Not immediately, not without difficulty, but eventually. He picked up the tools. He made something. The Night Haunter's proof had failed. Not because it hadn't landed. It had. Not because Vulcan was impervious. He was not. Because the thing Kersey was trying to disprove was, at bottom, not a fragile enough thing to be destroyed by even the most sustained and methodical assault. The compassion was not a performance. It was structural. It was load-bearing. Remove it, and there was no Vulcan left. Just the void that Kuze kept telling himself was underneath everyone. Kuze could not see that as a victory for his enemy. He could only see it as confirmation that Vulcan had not yet experienced enough. That eventually the void would show itself. He was still looking when he died. The Horus Heresy ended. The term is imprecise, because nothing that large ends cleanly it dispersed. The traitor legions driven back into the Eye of Terra by the Great Scouring, the loyalist forces pursuing them to the edges of the warp's reach, before pulling back to manage the wreckage of an Imperium that had been broken from within by the war meant to protect it. The Primarchs who had survived the heresy loyal to the Emperor were alive and diminished and beginning the long work of determining what came next. Vulcan was among them, changed as has been described, but present. And now confronted with the same argument that every surviving Primarch faced. What to do with what remained of the legions. Robert Guillemon's Codex Astartes was the answer that history settled on. The great legions, those tens of thousands strong armies under the command of a single Primarch, were to be broken into chapters, smaller, more independent, each governing itself under the broad framework of the Codex, no longer capable of the galaxy-shaking concentrations of force that the heresy had demonstrated were too dangerous in unworthy hands. It was pragmatic. It was wise, in its way. It was also a kind of grief for the Primarchs who submitted to it. The acknowledgement that the brotherhood the Emperor had built was finished and could not be rebuilt in its original form. The Salamanders accepted the second founding with less conflict than some of their brother legions. The 18th had already been reduced by Istvan Fee to something closer to a chapter's strength in terms of viable warriors. The practical mathematics of the division were less traumatic than they might have been because the division was working with less material to begin with. Successor chapters were established. The canon records several, each carrying Vulcan's gene seed forward into the galaxy's future, and the 18th became the Salamanders as they are known in the current age, a single chapter, small by the standards of most, deliberately maintained below even Codex strength. This last point is important, and speaks directly to what the Salamanders value. Most chapters maintain their roster close to the Codex, permitted 1,000 warriors. They recruit continuously, train constantly, try to keep their combat strength at the highest sustainable level, because more warriors means more capacity to fight the endless war. The Salamanders recruit selectively, and train with unusual depth, producing fewer warriors who are more thoroughly prepared and more individually capable, and accepting a smaller overall number as the cost of that standard. The practical argument is sound. A salamander warrior who has taken years longer to reach full status is a salamander warrior whose capabilities and, importantly, whose values are more deeply integrated. The Promethean Creed is not something the salamanders believe you can instill in a warrior on an accelerated timetable. It requires the forge time. It requires the specific slow work of building the character of a person who will trust you to do the right thing in the moment, when the right thing is the harder thing. The chapter would rather have 700 such warriors than 1,000 who have had the philosophy explained to them, but not had time to live it. Other chapter masters consider this eccentric at best and derelict at worst. The Salamander's response, which they deliver with the particular steady patience of warriors who have been making this argument since the second founding, is that they have been doing it this way for 10,000 years, and they have not yet failed their people. Nocturne was still there. The people were still there. The forges were still running. The city walls had fallen in the Night of Nights more times than could be counted and had been rebuilt every time. The salamanders came home between campaigns, walked among their people, helped with the reconstruction, named the children of the families they had known, carried the grief of the warriors they had lost, while carrying also the weight of the community that made the losses worth grieving. It is a strange thing to describe in a galaxy that has been at war for 10,000 years. But the salamanders maintained something during all of it that most of the rest of the Imperium lost before the ink was dry on Gearman's reforms. They maintained the reason. Not the strategic justification, not the political necessity, the actual specific named reason. These people, this world, this community of ordinary humans who do their work and raise their children and endure the Night of Nights and deserve, insofar as anyone in the Imperium of Man deserves anything, to be protected. The galaxy kept testing the chapter's ability to hold that conviction. The galaxy got worse and worse at it. The enemies more numerous, the fronts more stretched. The calls for the Salamander's aid coming in faster than the chapter could respond to all of them. Every decision about where to deploy was a decision about where not to deploy. And the people who would not be protected because the chapter was elsewhere were also people, also named, also specific. The Salamanders held their principle and carried their losses. They were not perfect. No organization maintained under this kind of sustained pressure across this kind of timescale is perfect. There were failures and decisions made in the heat of crisis that cooler analysis would have made differently. There were moments where the philosophy bent under the weight of events. But it did not break. 10,000 years is a long time to hold a principle that the universe is consistently demonstrating is expensive. The salamanders are the accounting. Everything they spent to hold it. Everything they held it through. The sum after 10,000 years is the chapter you see, smaller than it might be, more careful than is strategically optimal, more alive to grief than the machinery of the Imperium rewards, and completely uninterested in being otherwise. Vulcan left 9 things behind him. Not deliberately, not as a planned bequest, or at least not entirely. The 9 relics of Vulcan are artifacts associated with the Primarch across his history, items connected to him through use or making or the specific mythology that grew up around his life and his disappearances. They are scattered. They are not all accounted for. The salamanders have spent centuries searching for them, and the search itself has become part of what the chapter is. Not a distraction from their purpose, but an expression of it, The same principle of not abandoning what matters carried into the question of what a Primarch left behind. The relics have names: the Spear of Vulcan, the Gauntlet of the Forge, the Eye of Vulcan, the Obsidian Chariot, the Drakeskin Mantle, the Song of Entropy, the Scale of Scaros, the Iron Mantle, the Engine of Woes. Some are weapons, some are armor, some resist easy categorization. What they share is the quality of myth. The salamanders know them in the way a culture knows its foundational objects, through stories and significance as much as through physical description. The search for them is ongoing in the chapter's history. Warriors have been assigned to finding specific relics, mounted expeditions, followed leads across decades. Some have been recovered, some remain missing. The quest has its own momentum, the kind of momentum that grows when something is given sufficient time and sufficient meaning. The search for the relics has become inseparable from the search for Vulcan himself. The question of whether the Primarch will return, and what it would mean for the chapter if he did. Because that is the thing about Vulcan and his relics. The salamanders do not believe their Primarch is simply gone, in the way that a dead person is gone. He is a perpetual. They know this, or they know enough of it to understand that the permanence of his absence is not guaranteed. He has been gone before. He has been so thoroughly destroyed that there should have been no returning, and he returned. The relics are not only memorial objects. They are, in the salamander's understanding, nodes of his presence, things that connect to him in some way that is not fully explicable, and that the chapter guards accordingly. This gives the quest its particular emotional weight. Finding a relic is not archaeology. It is not the recovery of a historical object from a dead past. It is the recovery of something connected to a being who may still exist somewhere, who may return, who left these marks on the galaxy in the form of objects whose locations the salamanders trace, with the patience of people who have learned that waiting is also a form of faithfulness. The Promethean Creed maps onto this perfectly, which may not be an accident. Everything the salamanders believe about endurance and return and the persistence of what is real finds its fullest expression in the figure of their Primarch, who has proven by his existence that reality does not stop being real when it is temporarily destroyed, that the fire that takes something does not have the final word on whether that something exists. The 9 relics are, in this reading, material evidence of a theology, proof that Vulcan was here, that what he was persists in things he touched, that the relationship between the chapter and their Primarch did not end with his disappearance. The specific circumstances of Vulcan's disappearance are part of a story that properly belongs to a slightly later period, the War of the Beast in the 32nd millennium. But the shadow of that disappearance falls across all of the 9 relics' significance. When he was last seen, he had gathered some of the relics and used them for purposes connected to that war. When he was not seen again afterward, the remaining relics became simultaneously more important and harder to find, as if the mystery of his absence had spread to them. The salamanders do not despair of finding them. They do not despair of his return. Both statements feel too certain in a galaxy that provides little certainty, but something more accurate is also true. They do not stop looking. The looking is what they can do, and so they do it, in the same spirit with which they go back for the wounded and rebuild after the night of nights. You do not stop because you do not know the outcome. You continue because continuing is the practice of the belief you hold. There is a warrior in the chapter's records whose name is not consistently given. who spent 30 years tracing the location of a single relic across 4 sectors, following legends and fragmentary records and the testimony of individuals who had seen something they couldn't explain on worlds they would never visit again. 30 years of what would look from outside like obsession, and from inside the salamander's philosophy looks like duty. The relic was found. The record does not say what happened to the warrior. It does not need to. The relic was found, and it was returned to Prometheus, and the account is filed among the chapter's histories under the heading of things that were not abandoned. This is how the salamanders count things. What was not abandoned, what was brought back, what the fire took, and what survived it. The 9 relics are not all recovered. The search is not finished. Vulcan has not returned, not in any confirmed and settled way. The mythology is still open, the ending still unwritten, which is the condition of all mythology that remains alive. The salamanders keep looking. In the 32nd millennium, 15 centuries after the Horus Heresy, the galaxy produced a threat that briefly made the heresy feel like a manageable problem. The War of the Beast was the largest orc incursion in recorded human history. The warlord at its center was called the Beast, and the name was adequate. He was not the kind of orc the Imperium had learned to manage through centuries of ongoing border conflict, a massive brute with a large enough mob to overrun a sector before being brought down. The Beast was something different, something that the Ordo Xenos struggled to categorize and the Imperial command structure struggled to address, because the category it eventually settled on, once the full scale of the threat was visible, was civilizational. The Beast was running something close to a coordinated campaign across multiple systems simultaneously, with logistics and strategic intent that the Imperium had never attributed to greenskin warfare before or since. Attack moons. The Beast launched literal moons repurposed as weapons platforms against Imperial worlds, and one such weapon hung in the sky above Terra itself, firing on the throne world, reaching the sanctum at the heart of the Imperium, with violence that had been impossible to conceive of as a realistic threat since the heresy. The Imperium was losing. Not in the slow grinding way it often loses territory, the protracted withdrawal across years that leaves worlds burned and populations displaced but keeps the fundamental structure intact. It was losing in the acute way, in the way where the High Lords of Terra were confronted with the specific possibility that the war might end with something other than humanity. Into this, Vulcan returned. He had not been seen in any confirmed capacity since the events of the heresy's aftermath. The salamanders held to the theology of his return, believed in it, preserved the possibility of it, searched for his relics as acts of faith in the reality of the thing they awaited. But faith and confirmed sighting are different things, and 15 centuries without a confirmed sighting is a long time. He came back. Not with an army, not through official channels, not in a way that the Imperium's administrative machinery could easily process. He came back as Vulcan, walking into situations as they required him. The Perpetual doing what Perpetuals do, enduring the gap between moments of relevance, surfacing when the galaxy produced a situation that required what he specifically was. What he did during the War of the Beast is recorded imperfectly, and with the specific fragmentary quality of history, written by people who were trying to survive at the same time they were trying to document. He fought. He brought something to the conflict that no other individual could bring, which was the combination of his physical capabilities, his strategic understanding, and the specific weight of his presence on the salamanders who had been carrying his legacy for 1,500 years. He was the confirmation of the thing they had believed, that he would come back, that the fire does not have the final word, that survival is possible. The war was eventually won, not cleanly, and not easily, and the cost was enormous. The Imperial Fists chapter was nearly destroyed in the process, the last wall protocol invoked to reconstitute it from its successor chapters. Vulcan's role in the final accounting of the war involved the 9 relics in ways that the Salamander's records capture only partially. The use of items connected to him against a threat that required everything that could be brought to bear against it. And then he was not there again. Not dramatically. Not with a final statement or a farewell, simply not there in the aftermath. The presence that had returned briefly and made the return feel confirmed, withdrawing once more into the ambiguity that the Perpetual's existence seems inevitably to produce. The galaxy did not observe him leave. The salamanders did not receive a message of absence. He was present, and then the direct evidence of his presence stopped. The salamanders held what they had been given, which was the experience of having been right. The faith had not been misplaced. He had come back once, and that meant he could come back again, and that meant the looking was still valid, and the looking was still what they could do. They went back to Nocturne. They walked among the people of the 7 cities. They rebuilt after the latest Night of Nights had rearranged the landscape. They made weapons in the forges of Prometheus, and they kept the relics they had recovered, and they maintained the records of the ones still missing. The War of the Beast is not primarily a salamander's story. The last wall and the death of the last original Imperial Fist and the refounding of the chapter from its successors, that is the story the conflict is usually told through, because it is the story of a chapter that died and was reborn, and that dramatic shape is compelling. The Salamander's role is less narrative in structure. They were present. They contributed. They lost warriors in a war that dwarfed most of what had come before. Their Primarch came back and helped and left again. What it added to their theology was a datum. Returning is real. The fire takes things and the things come back. 1,500 years is not too long to wait. The War of the Beast passed into history. The salamanders turned to the next thing, as they always have. The galaxy is not short of next things, and the next things do not wait for grief to complete itself before arriving. The chapter carried their dead and their returned Primarch, and the particular bittersweet quality of confirmed faith into whatever came after. They were salamanders. They endured. They rebuilt. They returned to the forge. The salamanders are not subtle warriors. This is not a criticism. There is a category of battlefield problem that subtlety cannot address. And the salamanders have spent 10,000 years refining their approach to it. They are masters of a particular kind of war, close, punishing, built on the application of intense energy at short range. The fighting philosophy of a people whose world does not produce men who are comfortable with distance. Fire is their instrument. The relationship between the salamanders and flame weapons runs through their culture, their theology, and their tactical doctrine in a way that would be redundant if any one of those three didn't entirely justify it independently. Theologically, fire purifies and transforms. Culturally, Nocturne runs on fire, the volcanic landscape that provides both threat and resource, the forges that define what the chapter does and believes, the dying star whose light fails while the planet's core compensates. Tactically, flamers and melter guns, and the concentrated thermal weapons that the salamanders favor are enormously effective at the close ranges that the chapter's doctrine tends to produce. They advance. They close. They bring the war to ranges where their weapons are maximally effective, and where the quality of individual warriors matters more than any numerical advantage the enemy might hold. A salamander in Terminator armor, storm shield raised, advancing through enemy fire toward a position that needs to be destroyed, is a problem of a specific and unpleasant kind for whoever is defending that position. The advance is not fast. It is not elegant. It is inexorable in the manner of things driven forward by something that does not register the cost of continuing. Their thunderhammers are legendary in a more literal sense than most weapons. The salamander's tradition of mastercrafting means that their thunderhammers are not mass-produced items, but individual works, each one the creation of the warrior who carries it, finished to specifications that standard manufacture could not reliably achieve. The force that hits an enemy when a salamander brings a thunder hammer down is the force of a weapon that has been tuned and refined by the person using it, who understands every component because he made every component. This is not merely aesthetic preference. A weapon you have made is a weapon you know. You know its weight and its balance and the feel of the grip and the specific characteristics of its power field at different charge levels. You know where it is strong and where it is less strong. You are not guessing at what it will do. You know. And that knowledge, in the half-second window that close combat provides for decisions, is a meaningful advantage. The Fire Drakes are the chapter's elite, the veterans of the First Company, warriors of sufficient experience and standing that they fight in Terminator armor rather than the standard mark plate. They are what the salamanders produce at the end of the long process of making a warrior, the fulfillment of everything the chapter's training and philosophy and forge time accumulates toward. They carry storm shields and thunder hammers, and they advance through things that should stop and advance. And the reason for the name is not complicated. They are the thing that walks through fire. The salamanders also maintain, as an organic part of their doctrine, an emphasis on not leaving their own behind. In tactical terms, this means they will accept costs to recover the fallen, the wounded who can be saved, the dead who should be brought back to Nocturne rather than left on alien soil. This doctrine has strategic consequences that other chapter masters criticize. A unit that will not advance its position without bringing its casualties along is a unit that moves more slowly than the optimal tactical calculation suggests it should. The salamanders accept this trade. The reasoning, characteristically, is not purely tactical. You do not leave your brothers behind for the same reason you do not leave the civilians behind. Because they are people, and people are not to be abandoned if the alternative is available, and you are the alternative. The doctrinal friction this creates in joint operations is real. Other Space Marine commanders have complained, across the millennia, that coordinating with the salamanders requires accounting for a pace that their own doctrines don't produce, and for a set of priorities that they don't share. The salamanders are aware of this. They explain their position clearly. They do not apologize for it. The explanation is simple enough. If you win the battle by leaving your own people behind, you have demonstrated something about what your victory is worth. This is not a position that scales easily to Imperium-level strategy, and the salamanders know it. They are not naive about the mathematics of warfare. They know that the Imperium requires sacrifices that individuals would not choose to make, that the scale of the enemy requires a willingness to spend resources, including human resources, that a smaller conflict would not demand. They accept this as a reality. They also refuse to accept it as an ideal. The difference between accepting a reality and endorsing an ideal is the gap in which the salamanders live. They do what they must. They hold the line on who they are. Their armor is green, a deep, particular green, the color associated with Nocturne's volcanic glass and with the fires that produce it. They mark themselves as the sons of a volcanic world on a world of ice or void or jungle or hive slab, carrying the specific color of the place that made them into environments that have no knowledge of Nocturne and would not recognize the reference. The color is a declaration we are from somewhere, we were made by something. That making is not incidental. They are slow to anger, by the standards of the Adeptus Astartes. Not slow to fight, they are warriors and they engage without hesitation when engagement is what the situation requires. But slow to the specific pointless anger that some chapters cultivate as a tactical resource. The Space Wolves ride a controlled ferocity into battle. The Blood Angels manage the red thirst that is the legacy of Sanguinius's wound. The Salamanders go into battle deliberately, purposefully, with a specific fury that is colder than it looks. They are angry about the things that are happening to the people they are trying to protect. The fury comes from that. It is not generalized aggression. It is the very particular rage of someone who knows who is suffering and why, and refuses to accept that the suffering is inevitable. It makes them patient. It makes them thorough. It makes them the kind of army that will still be there when the battle has lasted longer than anyone wanted it to last. Still advancing, still bringing the fire, still not leaving. The Salamanders are not a chapter of famous individuals in the way that some of their brothers are. This is not because they lack individuals of exceptional capability or remarkable history. It is because their culture does not naturally produce the kind of celebration of individual achievement that creates famous warriors in the minds of the wider Imperium. The hero mythology that surrounds some chapters, the celebrated champions, the names that appear in crusade records and propagandist hymns and the naming of battleships, finds less purchase in the Salamander's tradition, which is more interested in what was collectively done than who specifically did it. But individuals still matter, and the Salamanders have produced warriors who carry their chapter's character to its fullest expression. Tushan served as chapter master for a significant period in the 41st millennium, and his character is perhaps the most complete available example of what the Promethean Creed produces in full maturity. He was not, by available accounts, a theatrical figure. He did not inspire his warriors with rousing speeches or cultivate a particular personal mythology. He led the way Salamanders lead, which is to say from the front, with deliberateness, with the specific steadiness that comes from being very clear about what you are doing and why you are doing it. His particular distinction beyond the standard competence of a chapter master of his standing was his relationship with the Salamander's approach to joint operations. Tushan was the warrior other commanders eventually learnt to respect and sometimes be exasperated by. The one who would, when the tactical conference proposed a course of action that would result in significant civilian casualties for minor strategic advantage, say so. Clearly, without the diplomatic softening that might make the objection more palatable and less pointed. He understood that the conversations needed to happen, and he was willing to have them at whatever cost to his relationships with other commanders. He was not a comfortable ally. He was an absolutely reliable one. There is a distinction, and it matters. Braearth Ashmantle is the dreadnought. The dreadnoughts of the Adeptus Astartes are among the most poignant figures the chapter system produces. Warriors who have been so catastrophically wounded that they can no longer survive without the life support of the ancient armored sarcophagus, but who are too valuable, too experienced, too much an embodiment of the chapter's history to be allowed to simply die. They are interred, entombed is perhaps more accurate, in the dreadnought shell. And they fight on, the body broken beyond repair, but the warrior still present inside the machine, sleeping between battles, waking to fight, and then returning to sleep, accumulating centuries of interrupted service. Braearth Ashmantle fought his way into the sarcophagus through a campaign that the Salamander's records describe, with the specificity reserved for events that shaped the chapter's understanding of itself. He was a warrior of the Fire Drakes, 1st Company, Terminator Armor, the highest tier of the chapter's combat capability, and he was taken apart by what he was fighting in a way that would have killed anyone else. What the records emphasize is not the wound, but what preceded it. Ashmantle had spent the battle protecting a group of civilian survivors trapped in a position that the tactical map had marked as a casualty zone. He was where he was in the way that he was destroyed, because he had chosen not to leave them. He was interred. He woke. He fought again. The Salamanders tend their dreadnoughts with particular care, and the care is not only practical, the maintenance of the sarcophagus, the systems checks, the protocol for the awakening. It is pastoral in a way. The warriors who enter the sarcophagus carry everything that made them warriors, and the grief of what they have lost in the process of becoming what they now are, and the chapter acknowledges both. The dreadnoughts are not machines that happen to contain a person. They are people who are enduring, as the Promethean creed holds, what must be endured, in order to continue serving the purpose that gives endurance meaning. Braearth Ashmantle is an old machine now by any reckoning, old and enormously dangerous and carrying, in the encrypted memory banks of the sarcophagus, knowledge of wars that no living salamander has fought. The chapter consults him as you would consult any elder, with respect for what has been seen and patience for the specific perspective that only great age and great loss can provide. The Forgfather is a role as much as a person. The chapter's master craftsman, keeper of the forged traditions, responsible for maintaining the standards of work that the Promethean creed requires. The Forgfather is the one who decides when a weapon is good enough, and the standard he applies is not purely technical, not the tolerances of the machine, though those matter, but something harder to quantify. Whether the weapon is true, whether the person who made it honestly, with attention to what it is for, whether the craft was conducted as the creed requires, with the understanding that the thing being made will protect someone, that the making is inseparable from the protecting, that you are not building a weapon, you are building the capacity to defend. This sounds abstract, and it is, which is why the Forgefather matters. The abstract made practical, the philosophy given the specific form of a hand correcting the grip on a hammer, or a master inspecting a heat sink and asking the warrior who made it whether he understands what he built. The answer is not supposed to be a recitation of specifications. It is supposed to be a demonstration of comprehension, not just technical but moral, the specific kind of knowing that links the object to its purpose and the purpose to the people it serves. These are the salamanders in miniature. A chapter master who makes other commanders uncomfortable by being honest. A dreadnought who entered the sarcophagus because he didn't leave civilians behind. A master of the forge who judges weapons by whether the maker understood their purpose. Three figures who are different in almost every way except the one that matters. They carry Vulcan's answer to the contest forward in everything they do. The point of power is the protection of those who do not have it. They haven't stopped believing it. Across 10,000 years of evidence that the galaxy does not reward that belief, they haven't stopped. Vulcan's gene seed spread as all gene seeds must, into successor chapters, new commands established at the second founding, and later, each carrying forward the biological inheritance of the Primarch into different bodies, different histories, different expressions of what that inheritance produces in the conditions it encounters. The successors are varied. Some wear their origin most explicitly in their traditions. The Firelords and the Hammers of Nocturne carry the Promethean philosophy forward in forms their parent chapter would recognize. The Forge culture and the defensive instinct for civilian life present in their doctrine. Others have developed their own characters over the millennia of independent operation. The gene seed still present but expressed through traditions that have accumulated their own weight and their own particular shape. The most unusual of the known successors are the Black Dragons. The Black Dragons are remarkable for a reason that the Adeptus Mechanicus and the Inquisition find more interesting than comfortable. They have developed what amounts to a mutation in Vulcan's gene seed, one that produces bone growths, osseous spurs from the elbows and the top of the skull. The growths are functional rather than purely biological anomaly. They are weapons, in practice additional blades that the Black Dragons have developed a fighting style around using. The chapter has been investigated by the Inquisition and found thus far to be loyal and effective and possessed of a mutation that, for all its unusual appearance, has not compromised either their combat effectiveness or their adherence to the Emperor's cause. The Inquisition's discomfort is understandable and worth noting without fully endorsing. The gene seed of the Primarchs was engineered to extraordinary standards, and mutations in it are not standard occurrences. That the Black Dragons carry Vulcan's gene seed in a form that produces visible, dramatic, weaponizable physical changes raises the question of what else might have changed that is less visible and less dramatic. The Inquisition asks this question not out of malice, but out of the specific professional paranoia that the 38th millennium's events have made, arguably, reasonable. The Black Dragons fight. They fight effectively. They fight for the Imperium. The Bone Spurs have not turned them heretic, despite the Inquisition's periodic concerns. And the fighting style they have developed around the mutation is, if anything, impressively practical. Warriors who have adapted what the gene seed gave them into a functional combat methodology, rather than treating it as a stigma to be concealed or denied. Whether Vulcan would have considered the mutation a problem is, in one sense, unknowable. In another sense, the answer suggested by his character is fairly clear. A Primarch who believed in adaptation, in working with what the Forge gives you, in accepting the results of the fire rather than pretending they aren't what they are. Such a Primarch would probably look at warriors who turned their biological anomalies into weapons and see nothing to disapprove of. He might have found the Inquisition's anxiety less interesting than the practicality of the adaptation. The Fire Drakes deserve a separate note. because they are sometimes confused with the succession question. The Fire Drakes are not a successor chapter. They are the first company of the Salamanders themselves, the elite veterans who have earned the right to fight in Terminator armor, the furthest point of the chapter's internal hierarchy of experience and skill. The name comes from Nocturne's most dangerous creature, the Fire Drake, whose invulnerability to the volcanic landscape of the world mirrors the warrior's endurance under fire. They are the Salamanders at their most developed, and their presence in a battle represents the chapter's most committed response to whatever situation has required them. The successors in aggregate spread Vulcan's gene seed across a wider range of the galaxy than the parent chapter alone could cover. And in doing so, they spread versions of the Promethean philosophy into the wider Adeptus Astartes. Not all of them maintain it as explicitly as the parent chapter. Not all of them have preserved the forged traditions or the return to Nocturne relationship with their homeworlds, or the specific approach to civilians that makes the Salamanders unusual in joint operations. Gene seed and culture are not the same thing, and 10,000 years of separate development produces 10,000 years of divergence in everything except the underlying biology. But the biology carries something. The melanchromic organ of Vulcan's gene seed, even in the successors who have diverged culturally, still produces the characteristic darkening of the skin in response to radiation exposure. The successors of Vulcan wear his physical inheritance on their bodies, even when the philosophical inheritance has faded in their traditions. There is something metaphorically appropriate about this, though the Salamanders would not call it metaphor, they would call it accurate. The fire leaves its mark, not always in the ways you planned, but the mark is real, and it is yours, and you carry it forward whether you intended to or not. The successors of Vulcan, from the Fire Lords and the Covenant of Fire to the Bone, spurred black dragons, are all carrying something from the Forge of Nocturne, from the contest in the village, from the Primarch who lost the prize to save the people. The inheritance of the most human of the Emperor's sons is in all of them. In some, it is louder. In some, it has gone quiet over the millennia, overlaid by other traditions, other pressures, other accumulations of history. But it is there. It was made to last. The galaxy has complicated feelings about the Salamanders, the ordinary people of the Imperium, when they know anything about the Salamanders at all, tend toward gratitude and something approaching awe. The specific awe of people who have been told all their lives that Space Marines are terrifying inhuman warriors who fight for the Imperium in ways that ordinary humans cannot comprehend, and who then encounter Salamanders and discover that the warriors can in fact be talked to and will in fact stop fighting long enough to help move refugees out of a war zone. This is not the experience most populations have of the Adeptus Astartes, and the Salamander's reputation among the populations they have served is correspondingly warm. There are shrine worlds in the Salamander's operational history. Worlds where the chapter's actions during a particular campaign left a mark deep enough that the local theology incorporated them. Not as gods, which the Salamanders would find both inaccurate and theologically inappropriate, but as something close to guardian figures, the beings who came when the darkness arrived, and who carried people out of it. This is a reputation built over 10,000 years of consistent behavior, the kind of reputation that only consistent behavior across a very long time can produce. The other Space Marine chapters have more complicated feelings. Admiration is present among those who can see past the tactical friction. Warriors who have served alongside the Salamanders in extended campaigns and observed their performance over time tend to arrive at a grudging respect. Grudging not because the competence isn't real, but because the philosophy that underlies it is uncomfortable to sit alongside if you do not share it. You can admire a warrior who won't leave his people behind and also find, in the heat of a campaign where the operational tempo is demanding, that his refusal to move without accounting for them has cost you time you needed. Both things can be true, and both usually are. The Ultramarines, the chapter most associated with Codex adherence and the standard against which other chapters' deviations are measured, have a professional respect for the Salamanders that is sometimes expressed as disagreement. The Salamanders' smaller than Codex force strength has been a point of discussion in joint planning for 10,000 years. The Ultramarines' position is essentially bureaucratic. In the most high-minded sense, the Codex exists because the Horus Heresy happened, and the Codex's wisdom deserves to be followed. And the Salamander's deliberate choice to field fewer warriors than the Codex permits is a choice that, however principled its reasoning, does not help with the practical problem of there being too many threats and too few chapter strength responses to them. The Salamander's response to this is politely delivered and absolutely firm. They produce fewer warriors, because the warriors they produce are better for the purpose of what a salamander is supposed to be. The Codex is a guide, and the salamanders honor its spirit, while acknowledging that the letter of it is sometimes in tension with the deeper purpose it is meant to serve. The Ultramarines, in their philosophical charity, usually find this acceptable in the abstract and exasperating in the operational specific. The Space Wolves have less complicated feelings. They understand warriors who refuse to leave their people behind in the visceral way of a culture that has always structured itself around the pack's protection of its own. The theological framing is entirely different. The Fenrisian mythology of the warrior's duty is not the Promethean creed in any way, but the underlying value maps cleanly enough that the two chapters tend to understand each other better than the strategic calculus would predict. The Inquisition is where the complicated feelings become genuinely complicated. The Inquisition does not distrust the Salamander's loyalty. The record of 10,000 years is unambiguous in that regard, and the Inquisition is, whatever its faults, an institution that follows evidence. The Salamanders have fought the enemies of the Imperium with absolute commitment across the entirety of Imperial history. They are not suspect in their purpose. What makes the Inquisition uneasy is harder to articulate cleanly, and the Inquisitors who have examined it most carefully have tended to describe it as a structural concern rather than an accusation. The Salamanders' emotional connection to the civilian population of Nocturne, their return to their home world, their maintenance of something that looks uncomfortably like ordinary human relationships. All of these are departures from the standard of post-human remove that Astartes' doctrine considers desirable. A warrior who can be reached through the people he loves is a warrior who can theoretically be manipulated through them. An emotional bond is a lever. The Salamanders know the argument, and they find it dishonest, in the particular way that they find dishonest any reasoning that uses the language of protection to justify stripping away what is worth protecting. A warrior with no connections cannot be manipulated through them. He can also not be trusted to understand why the connections matter in the first place. The Inquisition and the Salamanders have maintained this disagreement, mostly at low volume across the millennia. The Inquisition watches. As the Inquisition watches everything, the Salamanders fight. As the Salamanders fight everything, thoroughly and without particular interest in the discomfort their existence produces in those who prefer their warriors philosophically simpler. What the galaxy ultimately makes of the Salamanders is not settled by any of these individual relationships. It is settled by the record. 10,000 years of wars fought, civilians protected, fallen brought home, forges maintained, Nocturne rebuilt after every night of nights. The long, unspectacular, absolutely consistent practice of a belief that the universe does not, on balance, reward. The Salamanders do not need the universe to reward it. They hold it because it is true. The galaxy has not yet produced a counter-argument compelling enough to move them. Let the abstract become concrete. Let one battle stand for the thousands of battles the Salamanders have fought across 10 millennia, not because it is the largest or the most strategically significant, but because it illustrates the principle more completely than doctrine can. A hive world. Industrial, densely populated, vital to the Imperium's output in its sector. The orcs had come in enough numbers to overrun the outer defenses before the garrison could organize a coherent response. And now the main hive was besieged and the lower habs, the levels nearest the ground, where the bulk of the population lived in the specific squalor of Imperial underhive existence, were being cleared by the greenskin advance. Cleared in the greenskin sense. Made empty. The Salamanders arrived as part of a joint force. Other chapters were present. The strategic plan, as presented, identified the hive's production facilities as the priority, the manufactorums that produced the output the sector needed, located in the mid and upper hive levels, well above the lower hab zones where the orc advance was concentrating. The argument for the plan was sound. Secure the production capacity. Prevent the orcs from capturing the infrastructure. Hold what could be held, and accept the losses in the lower habs as the operational cost of securing the greater objective. The Salamander's commander at the time looked at the map. He looked at the lower hab markings that indicated population density. He asked how many people were in those levels. The answer was in the millions. He went to the lower habs. This is the shape of every Salamander's battle that history tells against tactical logic. It is never a simple decision, never without cost. The cost in this case was borne by the upper hive's defenders, who held without the Salamander's support for longer than the plan had accounted for, who took greater losses than they would have taken with full force available, who afterwards registered formal complaints that went into the chapter's records alongside the after-action reports. The complaints were valid in tactical terms. The losses were real and the losses matter, and the Salamanders do not pretend otherwise. But here is what the lower habs contained. Families in the hab blocks, children, workers who had gone to the day shift and come back to find their level contested. The specific dense civilian population of an underhive, not a fighting force, not a military asset, not a strategic resource. People who had nowhere to go and no way to fight back and no reason to expect that anyone would come for them. Because the Imperium had spent the last several thousand years teaching its populations that space marines fight for the Imperium, not for them. The Salamanders came for them. The fighting in the lower habs was close, brutal, and conducted in exactly the conditions that Salamander's doctrine is designed for. Tight corridors, enemy that needed to be engaged at short range, civilian populations that needed to be moved, protected, extracted through the chaos of an active battle. The flame weapons were in their element. The thunderhammers cleared choke points. The fire drakes led, because the fire drakes always lead when the fire is hottest. It took longer than the plan had allowed. It cost more of the chapter's warriors than a different choice of objective would have. It complicated the wider battle in ways that took 3 days to resolve, rather than the projected one. The millions in the lower Habs survive. This is not a complete tactical victory. The production facilities took additional damage in the period before the upper hive was reinforced. The other chapters involved wrote their after-action reports with the specific restraint of professionals who understood they were putting their frustration on record without wishing to start an inter-chapter incident. The broader campaign continued, and in the end the hive world was held, the orcs broken and driven out. The sector's output capacity restored at cost. The salamanders came home carrying their dead as they always do. They brought the warriors who had fallen in the lower Habs back to Prometheus. They held their remembrance. They went back to the forge. The people of the lower Habs do not know the names of the warriors who fought for them. The salamanders would not expect them to. That is not why the fight was made. But some of them built a small shrine in one of the cleared corridors where the fighting had been heaviest. A thing of accumulated small offerings and scratched names, and the inscription they put at its top was not a sophisticated theological statement. It was what came to mind when a group of people who had survived something unsurvivable tried to express what they felt. It said, "They came for us." In the philosophy of the salamanders, there is no more important thing to be said about a warrior. This is what the Promethean creed produces in practice, not the rhetoric of protection. The actual protection, costly, logistically complex, contested by the legitimate arguments of tactical necessity, consistently chosen anyway, over and over, across 10,000 years. The decision is never simple. It is never without trade-offs. The salamanders make it anyway, because the alternative is to look at the millions in the lower Habs and decide they are a number. And once you have made that decision, once you have changed the kind of warrior you are in a way that cannot be undone. The salamanders have never made that decision. They do not intend to start. They came for the people in the lower Habs. They will come again when the next hive is besieged and the next plan assigns the civilians to the acceptable loss column. They will go where the people are, and they will fight, and the fighting will be brutal and effective and conducted by warriors who understand exactly what they are doing and why. They will come. That is the doctrine. 3 words, and 10,000 years of blood. Other Space Marine chapters have homeworlds, but the relationship is not the same. When a Blood Angel returns to Baal, he returns to the fastness of his chapter's home, to the specific rituals of his legion's tradition, to the company of his brothers. The world is a backdrop and a resource. It provides the suns and the sanctity and the staging ground. The people of Baal do not know the Blood Angels as neighbors. When a salamander returns to Nocturne, he goes into the city. This is not a figure of speech. This is the practice. A salamander on leave from campaign, between deployments, recovering from wounds, or in the periods of relative quiet that punctuate even the most active chapter's schedule, does not remain in Prometheus, the fortress monastery on the moon above the world. He descends. He goes to one of the 7 cities and he walks in it. He knows the cities. He grew up in one of them. was chosen from it, has returned to it across the years of his service. The city has changed, because Nocturne changes. The Night of Nights ensures that no landscape remains stable for long, and the human landscape of settlement and community changes with it. But the changes are known. The salamander knows what was there before, and understands the shape of what replaced it. He talks to people, not in the way a ruler talks to subjects, from behind the dignity of office and the distance of power. He talks to people the way someone who is from a place talks to the people he grew up near, with the specific familiarity that comes from shared history, even history that has stretched and changed over the years of his service. He knows the families. He knows which buildings have been rebuilt since the last major seismic event, and who built them, and what they lost in the event that necessitated the rebuilding. He helps in the rebuilding when there is rebuilding to be done, which there usually is because Nocturne is Nocturne. A Space Marine's physical capabilities are considerable, and the practical application of those capabilities to the work of reconstruction, clearing rubble, lifting structural elements that a team of ordinary humans would need machinery to move. The specific physical work of rebuilding a city after a geological catastrophe is not beneath the dignity of a salamander. The Primarch himself did this work. His sons do not consider it optional. What this produces over the span of a warrior's service is a relationship with a community that no other chapter maintains. The salamander, who has been a warrior for decades, has been back to his home city a dozen times, has seen the families of his childhood grow and change and produce new generations, has helped rebuild after 3 major Night of Nights events, has attended funerals and celebrations and the ordinary texture of community life that Space Marine doctrine explicitly removes from the experience of every other chapter. The children of Nocturne grow up knowing that Space Marines are real, not mythological figures, not the terrifying celestial warriors of Imperial propaganda who descend from the sky in fire. Real, tall and dark-skinned and enormously strong, yes, but also present, also in the city, also helping move the debris from the collapsed section of the Hesiod wall after the last seismic event. The ore does not disappear, how could it? But it is ore of a different quality from the ore most populations feel. It is the ore of people who know the salamanders personally, and have found that personal knowledge does not diminish but deepens the respect. The candidates who present themselves for the trial of fire have not, most of them, been inspired by stories of distant glory. They have been inspired by specific named warriors whom they have seen, who came back, who helped, who were there in the city doing the work. The motivation to earn a place in the chapter is not abstract aspiration toward a mythic ideal. It is the desire to become something they have watched from the outside and found worthy. This changes what the chapter gets from its recruitment. The young Nocturnians who pursue the trial of fire have already been shaped to some degree by the chapter's values, not because they were taught them in an abstract sense, but because they watched them practiced. The values are not presented to them as doctrine. They are shown as behavior over years in the actual life of the cities that the candidates grew up in. You do not need to explain the Promethean creed to a boy who spent his childhood watching salamanders help rebuild his neighborhood. He has already understood it. He is trying to earn the right to practice it at a higher level. The women of Nocturne are not candidates for the Astartes program. The biology of the Adeptus Astartes has never included female initiates, though the Sisters of Battle exist as an entirely separate and equally committed institution. But the women of Nocturne carry the chapter's values as well, are part of the same culture, are shaped by the same contact with returned warriors, and pass that shaping to their children. The relationship between the chapter and the community is not limited by the fact that the community produces only male space marines. It extends to the whole community, as values always extend to communities when the people who carry them treat the community as their own. The Night of Nights comes and the cities change and the salamanders descend from Prometheus and help with the work. And the relationship between the chapter and the people of Nocturne is maintained through the doing of it, not through the proclamation of it. This is, in miniature, the argument that the salamanders have been making for 10,000 years. The case for their philosophy is not made in rhetoric. It is made in practice. You don't protect people by describing protection. You protect people by being there when the Night of Nights comes. By coming down from the fortress and walking into the city. By knowing the names. The salamanders know the names. The salamanders carry grief the way most warriors carry weapons. It is always there. It is the weight they have accepted as part of what they are. A space marine is not supposed to be capable of grief in the ordinary human sense. The transformation process that creates an Astartes is thorough, and part of what it alters is the emotional architecture that makes grief so destructive in ordinary humans. The incapacitating quality of the loss, the way it interrupts function, the specific paralysis that comes from caring about something that can now only be remembered rather than experienced. The standard Adeptus Astartes warrior is designed not to be paralyzed by loss. He is designed to register it and continue. The salamanders register it and continue, but they register it in a more complete way than most. Consider what it means to be a salamander who has built relationships with the people of his home city, who has returned to them across decades of service, who knows the names, and who then is deployed to a campaign on the other side of the galaxy and receives, weeks or months later, the report that the Night of Nights came to his city while he was away. And the specific hab block where the children he helped name used to live collapsed in the seismic event, and some of the families he knew did not survive. This is not a theoretical exercise. This is what happens periodically to salamanders. Nocturne is a dangerous world, and the Night of Nights is not gentle, and the warriors of the chapter are often elsewhere when it arrives. They come home to the aftermath. They help rebuild after losses they could not prevent. They carry the specific grief of the protector who was not there at the moment protection was needed. The salamanders do not become paralyzed by this grief. They are warriors, and they function, and the next campaign is prepared for. And the next battle is fought with full capability. The grief does not disable them, but it is there. They do not put it down, because putting it down would mean pretending it was not real, and pretending it was not real would mean pretending the people whose loss they are grieving were not real, and the refusal to pretend that is the entire foundation of the Promethean Creed. The weight is the acknowledgement. The acknowledgement is the point. This creates a particular quality in the salamander's bearing that outsiders consistently remark on. There is a steadiness to them that other warriors read, depending on their own character and tradition, as either profundity or melancholy. The salamanders are not sad people. in the sense of being defined by sadness, in the sense of sadness being their primary register. They are joyful when joy is available. The return to Nocturne after a long campaign has its celebrations. The forging of a particularly successful peace has its satisfaction. The rescue of civilians who expected to be abandoned has its specific and genuine delight. But the joy is always held alongside the weight. There is a density to the Salamander's emotional landscape that a chapter which has successfully isolated its warriors from ordinary human connection does not have. They are more because they carry more. The more is not only suffering, it includes the richness of actual relationship, of knowing people, of returning to places where you are known. But the more includes suffering too, and they have chosen not to amputate the suffering in order to keep the richness. The Promethean Creed says this is the right choice, that a warrior who has successfully removed his capacity for grief has removed his capacity for understanding what he is fighting for. The two capacities are not separable in the way that the logic of emotional management suggests. You cannot reliably keep the good stuff if you systematically eliminate the mechanism that produces it. The Salamanders have not tested this claim empirically, by which I mean they have not conducted the experiment of removing the emotional connections and seeing whether the protective instinct persists. They don't need to. They know what the experiment produces, because they have watched it produce its results in other chapters across 10,000 years. Warriors who fight effectively and protect nothing in particular, who win battles in service of an abstraction that they could not put human faces to, who would tell you, if asked why they fight, that they fight for the Imperium, meaning the political and theological structure rather than the people the structure is supposed to contain. The Salamanders fight for the people. Not instead of fighting for the Imperium. The Imperium is the people, or it is supposed to be. And when it forgets that it has made an error that the Salamanders are perpetually, politely, firmly trying to correct. But in the hierarchy of their actual motivation, the Imperium is the vessel and the people are what it carries. You keep the vessel because you need it to keep what it carries. You do not preserve the vessel by emptying it. The grief, then, is the evidence of the fullness. A salamander who grieves for the people he lost is a salamander who had them to lose, who allowed them to be real, who did not protect himself from the weight of that reality by maintaining a careful distance. The grief is the cost of the relationship, and the relationship is the reason the grief matters, and the reason the grief matters is that the people were real. The galaxy has not made it easy to hold this. The galaxy has tried many times and through many instruments to demonstrate to the salamanders that their grief is a weakness, that caring about specific people leaves you vulnerable to the specific loss of those people, that the correct response to this vulnerability is to stop caring in ways that produce vulnerability. The salamanders carry their grief into the next battle anyway. They have not found a better argument than the one Vulcan demonstrated on the day he lost a contest to save his village. You are not made stronger by the things you put down. You are made stronger by carrying what matters well enough that it does not break you. The grief does not break them. It is part of what holds them together. The galaxy has been getting worse. This is not a new observation. The galaxy has been getting worse for 10,000 years, which is the entire span of the Imperium's recorded history. A consistent trajectory of increasing threat infinite and decreasing capacity that the strategic planners of Terra have been trying to manage for longer than most civilizations in human history have existed. The chaos incursions have grown more frequent. The Xenos threats have become more varied and more sophisticated. The internal heresies have multiplied. The worlds that are safe today were not safe last decade and will not be safe next century. But the opening of the Great Rift was a different kind of worse. The cicatrix maledictum, the wound in the galaxy's skin that stretches across it from one end to the other, the scar that chaos has torn through the veil between the immaterium and real space. In a scar that cannot be closed, the galaxy is divided. The light of the Astronomicon reaches less of it than it did before. Communication across the rift is unreliable and sometimes impossible. Worlds that existed in the secure interior of Imperial space now exist at the edge of the dark, the warp pressing against their reality in ways it did not before. And the chaos forces that pour through the rift onto those worlds are the consequence. The salamanders fight in this environment as they fight in every environment, thoroughly, purposefully, with fire and thunder and the grinding determination that the Promethean creed produces in warriors who have made their peace with the fact that the fight is long. But the scale of what the rift has produced is straining even the salamanders' capacity to maintain their particular standard. The question that the Era Indomitus forces on every loyal chapter is not new in kind, but more acute in degree. How do you protect the people when there are more threats than there are warriors to address them? The calculus of triage, this world over that one, these people over those, which the salamanders have always resisted accepting as a final answer, is pressing harder now than it has pressed before. The Primaris reinforcements brought by Roboute Guillemot's Indomitus Crusade gave the chapter new warriors, the enhanced Astartes that Archmagos Call had been developing across 10,000 years of secret work, larger and more capable than the Astartes of the preceding millennia, designed to tip the balance in a war that had been tipping the wrong way. The salamanders received them. The new warriors were integrated, trained in the Promethean creed, brought to the forges, taught to make as well as to fight. The integration was not without complication. Primaris Marines of any chapter must grapple with the question of their place. They are of the chapter's gene seed, but not of its history. Not yet. Not in the way that warriors who have fought and grieved and rebuilt across decades are of it. The salamanders approach this with the specific patience they apply to everything that requires patience. The Primaris would learn. They would go to Nocturne. They would walk in the cities. They would help with the rebuilding. They would come to know the names. It would take time. And time is something the Promethean creed has always required. Brearth Ashmantle fights centuries in the sarcophagus, and Ashmantle fights in the Era Indomitus as he fought in whatever decade the records no longer individually track. The ancient machine bringing its terrible capability to bear against enemies that were not conceived of in the era when he first climbed into the shell. He is consulted. He advises. He is, as old dreadnoughts are, patient with the questions and more patient still with the silence between questions, the silence where the answers develop. Nocturne continues its own war against its own nature. The Night of Nights does not concern itself with the strategic situation of the wider galaxy. The moon's gravity pulls on the planet's crust with the indifference of physics. and the crust responds with the indifference of geology, and the cities rebuild with the specific resilience of people who have been doing exactly this for as long as their history extends. The salamanders come home when they can. They help with the work. They know the names of the new dead. The era Indomitus has not broken the salamanders. Nothing has broken the salamanders across the full 10,000 years of the Imperium's existence, though the heresy came close in a material sense at Istvan V. The chapter continues. The forges run. The trial of fire takes candidates and produces warriors at the rate that the chapter's standard demands, which is slower than most chapters, and produces fewer warriors, and produces warriors who are, in the judgment of the salamanders themselves, exactly what they are supposed to be. The galaxy is darker than it has ever been. The rift bleeds chaos onto worlds that did not expect to become front lines. The enemies multiply. The calculation of sacrifice, always present, has become louder and more insistent. The voices arguing for it more numerous. The examples offered for why the chapter should be more like the other chapters more frequent and more pointed. The salamanders hear the argument. They find it familiar. They have been hearing it for 10,000 years, stated with escalating urgency as the situation has escalated from urgent to critical to catastrophic to whatever word comes after catastrophic. They nod. They acknowledge the difficulty. And then they go to wherever the civilians are and they make sure the civilians get out. The galaxy has not yet produced an argument that the chapter finds more compelling than this. The galaxy has not yet produced a situation so extreme that the chapter has decided the people are finally expendable. It has tried very hard. For a very long time, the salamanders endure. Vulcan is not here. He was last seen in the fullest account the salamanders keep, in the context of the War of the Beast, that 32nd millennium catastrophe where the largest orc incursion in human history pressed its war moon against the sky above Terra itself, and the Imperium looked, for a brief and terrible period, at the serious possibility of its own end. Vulcan was there. He acted. He brought to that conflict everything that a perpetual Primarch could bring. His physical capabilities, his strategic experience, the weight of 9,000 years of existence carrying forward from the heresy through whatever the interval had been. He was present, confirmed, real. After the conflict resolved, he was not dead. Or at least, not dead in any final sense that the concept of death applies to a perpetual. He has died before. He has come back from deaths that were definitive by any standard except the one that apparently applies to him. The salamanders do not record his death as a settled fact, because they cannot record it as a settled fact. What they record is his absence, which is a different thing, and which has lasted now for the better part of 17 centuries with no confirmed sighting. The 9 relics are the texture of this absence. Some of them were used, the chapter believes, in the War of the Beast, connected to whatever Vulcan did in that conflict, the relics of a Primarch who was still, apparently, a craftsman at heart even when the craft was being applied to war. Some remain to be found. The search for them is the Salamander's most sustained project, the one that has run continuously longer than almost any other chapter initiative in the Imperium's history. It is not frenzied searching, not the desperate sweep of people who believe they are looking for something time-sensitive. It is the patient, methodical, decade-by-decade work of people who believe the thing they are looking for exists, and has not definitively been determined to be unfindable. There are inquisitors who have studied the question of Vulcan's fate and arrived at conclusions they have kept classified, in the way that the Inquisition keeps things classified when the conclusions are neither reassuring nor actionable. A perpetual of Vulcan's nature does not simply cease. He does not age out of existence. The theoretical options for his current state form a limited set. He is alive somewhere, recovering from something. As he has recovered before, he has achieved a death of sufficient magnitude and specific character to end even a perpetual cycle, which is a philosophical and theological question the galaxy has not settled the terms of. Or he is present in some form that the salamanders are not searching for because they do not know to search for it. The salamanders themselves do not find the uncertainty troubling, or rather they have made their peace with it. This is the Promethean creed in its application to the most personal possible question. You do not have certainty. You have the record of what you know. He came back. He came back from Istvan Fee, came back from Kurz's captivity, came back from whatever the 15 centuries of the heresy's aftermath had held for him. He returned in the War of the Beast when the need was greatest. He has not announced that this was the last time. The salamanders choose to interpret his silence as consistent with the pattern rather than as a break from it. This is not Navet. It is the same choice they make in everything else, the choice to hold the conviction against the pressure of the evidence that the conviction is expensive. The evidence that Vulcan is not coming back is at this point 17 centuries of absence. 17 centuries is a long time. The salamanders know it is a long time. They hold the belief anyway, not because the belief is empirically secure, but because the alternative, treating his absence as final, closing the search for the relics, revising the theology of return into the theology of loss, would mean becoming something different from what they are. The belief in Vulcan's return is not incidental to the salamander's character. It is a particularly pure expression of it. Every other thing the chapter does in the name of the Promethean creed, every civilian protected, every fallen brother brought home, every city rebuilt after the Night of Nights, is structured around the same core conviction that what the fire takes is not permanently taken, that survival is possible beyond what the moment of destruction suggests, that the returning is as real as the taking. Vulcan is the proof of this principle, the most complete available demonstration of it, the case study the Promethean creed cites when it needs to anchor the abstract in the specific and undeniable. He endured Kurz. He came back from Istvan V. He returned in M32. He is the argument made flesh, the principle expressed as person. For him to be permanently gone would require the salamanders to hold the principle without the proof, the faith without the demonstration. They are prepared to do this, because the faith was never entirely dependent on the demonstration. The proof was always supporting what the chapter already believed, not creating the belief from nothing. But it would be harder, it would be grief of a different order. The salamanders would endure that grief too, if they must. They have demonstrated repeatedly that endurance is something they have in quantity. But they have not reached the point where they must, because they have not reached the point where certainty of finality has been established. And until that certainty is established, if it ever is, the search continues. The forges run on Prometheus. The cities endure the Night of Nights on Nocturne and are rebuilt. The warriors go home and walk in the cities and know the names. The relics that have been found are kept. The relics that have not been found are sought. Vulcan has not come back. Vulcan has not said he isn't coming. The salamanders wait and fight and rebuild, as they have always done. The waiting is not passive. It is the specific active practice of people who know that what they are waiting for is real, and that the absence is temporary, sustained by the same refusal to put down the weight that defines everything else they do. He will return, or he will not. The galaxy does not provide the salamanders with this answer. The galaxy has not, in 10,000 years of relentless effort, been able to break the chapter of the habit of holding their convictions in the absence of guaranteed outcomes. This particular conviction is held the same way. The Imperium of Man is a contradiction that has been running for 10,000 years, and the salamanders are the sharpest expression of one half of it. The contradiction is this: the Imperium justifies its existence on the basis that it is protecting humanity. Every war it fights, every tax it levies, every conscription it enforces, every world it holds or loses or burns to prevent something worse, all of it is presented under the heading of humanity's survival. The Emperor's project, the Crusade's purpose, the Codex's framework, the Inquisition's authority, the Ecclesiarchy's faith. These things exist, the argument goes, because without them humanity would not survive what the galaxy contains. The Imperium is the price of existence in an environment that would otherwise consume the human species. This argument is not wrong. That is the most uncomfortable thing about it. The galaxy actually contains what the Imperium says it contains: chaos, xenos, heresy, the specific and varied forms of existential threat that the Imperium was built to resist. Without an institution of sufficient scale and will to address those threats, humanity would not exist in any recognizable form. The Imperium is terrible, and the Imperium is necessary, which is the paradox that the best minds of the age have not resolved, because the paradox does not resolve. But there is a subsidiary question that the Imperium's official narrative tends not to dwell on, which is, what is the humanity that the Imperium is protecting? What does it contain? What specifically is worth this much sacrifice and this much horror and this much accumulated cost across 10,000 years? Most of the Imperium's institutions do not answer this question directly. They refer back to the abstract, humanity as a category, as a species, as the project worth defending because the Emperor said it was worth defending, and because the alternative is extinction. The people within humanity, the specific people, the actual humans living their actual lives. They are contained in the category, but they are not the focus of the answer. The salamanders answer the question differently. Specifically, by name. The people worth protecting are the people in the hab blocks of the Underhive, and the people in the volcanic cities of Nocturne, and the people on the shrine worlds where the salamanders have fought, and the people in the villages that Vulcan came back to rather than win the contest. The specific, named individual humans who do not have the power to protect themselves, and who are, therefore, the thing that power exists to protect. Not the category, the people. This is the deepest argument the salamanders make, and they make it not in rhetoric but in practice, because they are warriors, and that is how warriors make arguments. Every time a salamander goes to the lower habs instead of the upper hive production facilities, he is making the argument. Every time a warrior brings back the fallen instead of leaving them, every time the chapter returns to Nocturne and walks in the cities and helps with the rebuilding, The argument is that the purpose of the Imperium is not the Imperium. The purpose of the Imperium is the people inside it. The institution exists to protect the people, not the reverse. And the moment you have reversed the priority, protected the institution at the expense of the people, preserved the structure by spending the ones it was built to contain, you have made an error that needs to be identified as an error and corrected. This is a radical argument, in the strict sense of going to the root of the thing. It is also, the salamanders would say, simply the argument that Vulcan made when he lost the contest. Not a philosophical innovation, an observation. The point of power is the protection of those who do not have it. The contest was the wrong thing to win. The Imperium does not fully accept this argument. It cannot, in a practical sense. The machinery of governance at galactic scale requires abstractions, requires the management of populations rather than the protection of individuals, requires the exact kind of strategic calculus that the salamanders refuse to endorse as a final answer. The High Lords of Terra do not know the people they rule by name. They cannot. The administratum would collapse if it tried. This is a structural reality rather than a moral failure, and the salamanders understand the distinction. But they also hold that a structural reality can contain a moral orientation, that even an institution which cannot know all its people by name can orient itself toward the protection of those people as its purpose, can maintain the conviction that the abstractions exist in service of the specifics rather than the reverse, and that the salamander's job, among other things, alongside the fighting, is to keep that orientation alive in the Adeptus Astartes, which is the institution most directly positioned between the ordinary human and the thing that wants to kill them. If the Space Marines forget what they are for, humanity is in the specific kind of danger that is hardest to name. Not the danger of the alien or the heretic or the daemon, which can at least be identified and fought. The danger of the protector who has forgotten the protected, who still fights but no longer quite knows why, who wins battles in service of a structure that has become an end in itself. The salamanders are the reminder. The green-armored warriors who go to the lower habs, who bring the fallen home, who return to Nocturne and walk in the cities and know the names. The reminder is not comfortable. Reminders rarely are. The salamanders have never been comfortable to fight alongside, never been the chapters that other chapter masters want at the planning table when the operational timetable is already under pressure. The argument they make with their behavior is an inconvenient argument, the kind that produces friction and complaints and formal records of disagreement. It is also the argument that, across 10,000 years of the worst the galaxy can produce, has not been successfully refuted. The salamanders fight on. The reminder stands. There is a forge on Prometheus that has been running, in one form or another, since before the Horus Heresy. It has been rebuilt. The Night of Nights does not spare Prometheus any more than it spares Nocturne, and the fortress monastery on the moon has been damaged and repaired and partially remade across the 10,000 years of the chapter's existence. The forge has moved. Its equipment is not the original equipment. The warriors who work it now are not the warriors who worked it in the earliest days of the Legion, nor the sons of those warriors, nor the sons' sons. The generations have accumulated too many times for that continuity to hold in any biological sense. But it runs. It has always run. The metal is worked. The hammer strikes. The heat is applied, and the quench and the refinement. A warrior who spent months acquiring the materials and the understanding and the patience to make what he is making bends over the work with the full attention of someone who knows that what he does here matters. Not grandly. Not because this single weapon will change the galaxy, but because this weapon will be used in the service of someone, and the someone deserves a weapon made well. This is the salamanders, not the battles, though the battles are real and the blood is real and the dead are real. Not the theology, though the theology is genuine and carefully held and articulated in the Promethean Creed with more precision than most warrior philosophies achieve. Not the statistics of 10,000 years of service or the casualty counts or the map of the worlds they have fought on. The forge. The warrior at the forge is making something for a reason he can name. He has been taught the names, the people of Nocturne who raised him, the civilians in the Hab blocks, and the shrine worlds and the agri worlds that need defending. The brothers who fight beside him and who are also people, also named, also worth the grief that losing them would produce. He has been taught to know these names and to hold them, and the holding is not optional, not something he can set aside when the weight gets too heavy. Because the weight is the acknowledgement, and the acknowledgement is the practice of the belief. The galaxy is not easy. This statement needs no elaboration for anyone who has spent more than a moment in it. The galaxy is hostile in every direction, to every form of life that is not powerful enough to withstand it. And the salamanders have spent 10,000 years standing between ordinary people and the hostile galaxy's most acute expressions of that hostility. They have paid for this. They are smaller than most chapters, and they know why they are smaller. The slow production of deeply formed warriors is a choice that costs them tactical flexibility and numerical reach, and they have made the choice deliberately and consciously, knowing what it costs, accepting the cost as the price of the standard. They do not regret it. The galaxy has tried many things against the salamander's particular character. Kurz tried nihilism, the philosophical argument made in blood, the repeated demonstration that the compassionate Primarch was only one more death away from becoming something else. It failed. The heresy tried scale, the catastrophic mathematics of Istvan Fie, the destruction so total that surviving it seemed to require abandoning what had made survival seem worth fighting for. It did not succeed. The millennia that followed tried the grinding, cumulative weight of endless war, the specific exhaustion of 10,000 years of never being finished. Always another battle, always another world, always another calculation about who can be saved this time and who must be left. The salamanders have not been untouched by any of these. They carry the marks of all of them. Vulcan is gone or is not yet returned. The distinction matters to the salamanders, and they maintain it. The fallen are remembered, and the grief is real, and the weight is real. The calculus of the endless war is never simple, and they are not naive about its complexity. But the forge still runs. The warrior who bends over the metal in Prometheus tonight is someone's son, someone from one of the 7 cities, chosen by the trial of fire and transformed by the chapter, and trained in the Promethean Creed and sent to war and brought home and sent again, carrying the weight of what he has done and what he has lost and what he has protected, carrying it alongside the hammer he is shaping. He knows who the hammer is for. Not a specific future battle. He does not know the specific future battle. But he knows the general purpose, and the general purpose has a face. And the face is from one of the cities on the world below the moon he lives on. And the face is not abstract. This is what makes the salamanders who they are. Not the flame weapons or the green armor or the gene seed that darkens their skin against the radiation of a dying world. Not the thunder hammers or the fire drakes or the master-crafted bolters. Not even Vulcan, though Vulcan is the source and the demonstration and the proof. What makes the salamanders who they are is the refusal to let the people become abstract. The insistence that behind every strategic objective and every tactical calculation and every command table map symbol for acceptable losses, there are actual people. That the number has a name. That the face matters. That the Imperium is, at bottom, not a structure worth preserving except insofar as it preserves the people who live inside it. And that a war fought in humanity's name that forgets about actual humans has already lost the thing that made the war worth fighting. Vulcan knew this when he lost the contest. He gave it to the 18th Legion, and the 18th Legion gave it to the Salamanders. And the Salamanders have given it to every person they have ever protected, which is a number beyond counting and beyond any ledger the administratum maintains. Because the administratum does not count the people who did not need to be put in the casualty column, because someone came for them. The Salamanders came for them. They come for them still. In the darkest time the galaxy has known in the Imperium's history, in the age of the Rift and the Indomitus Crusade and the 10,000 fronts that press on 10,000 worlds, with the specific and varied forms of the galaxy's hostility, they come, carrying their hammers and their fire and the weight of everything they have learnt about what it costs to protect and why the cost is worth paying. They are salamanders. They endure. They rebuild. They return to the forge. And the forge on Prometheus runs on. It has always run. It will run still.